This story's about Rosie Ruiz. You probably haven't heard of her. She's not very well known for a couple reasons that I'll get into. She was a Cuban American who grew up in Florida. She was born in the 50s, moved to New York in the 1970s, and in the late 1970s, she started to get into running. And in the 1979 New York Marathon, she tries to enroll in the marathon, but she was late to the application period. So fortunately, they let her run because she was dying of brain cancer. And so one of her dying wishes was that she wanted to run this marathon and prove that she could do it. So she runs the marathon, and she finishes with a time of like 2 hours, 56 minutes, I think, which it's like 3 hours and 15 minutes for like the qualifying time at the New York Marathon to make the Boston Marathon. So she made it totally fine. The thing was, at the end of the race, she had someone accompany her from the subway station to the finish line because she said that she had a leg injury. So they said like, oh, well, you're here in 2 hours and 56 minutes, even if you didn't really run the end of it because of your injury, we're going to allow it. It was like volunteer people working at the marathon. So they just said like, whatever, it's not a big deal. You were one of the people that said that you're dying of brain cancer. So obviously we're going to let you run the next marathon.
I like that. That's a great attitude to have.
Yeah, exactly. So like kind of promotes like pushing forward, whatever. She's had like a couple injuries and stuff now. So then that was like October 1979. So then the Boston Marathon is April 1980. And so the marathon goes on. It goes by a couple of universities in Boston. It's not Harvard. I actually couldn't tell you what the university was. But regardless, she actually finishes the marathon in first place with a time of 2 hours and 31 minutes. So a 25-minute improvement in like 6 months time training.
Yeah, 42 kilometers in 2 hours and 31 minutes.
31 minutes, yeah.
That's incredible.
And so that's there's kind of dispute about like whether or not that was either the fastest or the third fastest female time in history. There's different times on it. I think it's just like issues with the clocks and stuff over the years.
Oh.
But regardless, so she wins, and right after the race, they're congratulating her. And they ask her like, oh, you have such a big improvement. What, did you do a lot of like interval training? Who's your trainer? And she says, what is interval training? And no, I train myself. And there's also no footage of her actually running the first 41 and a half miles of that.
Well, were they filming the whole race?
Yeah. So like there's different like photographers along the way, and there was no sightings of her whatsoever.
Oh.
And then she's asked, what did you find interesting about the college in Boston that when you were passing there? What stood out to you? And she said, oh, like nothing really. Like I find it interesting running through like collegiate areas, but nothing really stood out.
That doesn't really surprise me. I'd be like, I'm focused on running a marathon.
For sure. But the one thing about the Boston Marathon in 1980 was that there was thousands of students just like out front cheering on the racers or the runners in the marathon. So usually like when the winners were asked about that, they said like, oh, it was great to have such support. It was cool to have such a big turnout, whatever. And she just didn't mention it at all. And then she just didn't really seem to know anything about the running whatsoever. So then obviously an investigation starts going on about like if she kind of cheated or if she jumped out or whatever. And there was two people at the college that said that she jumped out from like a big crowd at about like the 41 mile mark, and said that like they saw her jump out of a large crowd and start running then. Obviously this is two eyewitnesses and it's like a city full of people. Like two people are probably just...
It would have been the 24 mile mark, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, I think 26 miles is how long
Yeah, 42 kilometers, 26 miles.
Right, okay.
So
last mile,
in the last mile, she jumps out. A lot of the other runners are like, that's weird. She's not even sweating. She doesn't have huge leg muscles. This is kind of fishy. And then that's when everything about her story kind of just starts to break down. And at this point, a lady who helped her from the subway during the New York Marathon comes out and says that she was on the subway the whole time in New York, and that she never even ran the New York Marathon, and she didn't have the leg injury. So people start investigating the Boston Marathon then, and basically the person who finished second, I think it was Jeanette Garreau, said that she never even saw her pass her. So unless she's in first the entire race, which she wasn't, then you can't just like pass somebody.
Right.
So it's basically her medal was taken away from her, and to her dying day, she never admitted that she didn't run the marathon.
Oh no.
But she didn't run the marathon.
It's like it's not like some nasty rumors.
No. There's no footage of her ever completing either marathon except for like the last half a mile.
But that is what everyone focuses on.
For sure. But with like, obviously we know how widely televised, like there's like 6 marathons in the world that are kind of like the big marathons. There's like Chicago, Boston, New York,
right.
And then London, Paris, and I can't remember the last one. But basically those are like the running events that if you're a marathon runner, that's what you do.
I mean, I gotta say, they can't have been too much of a spectacle if someone came in first and no one realized that she had just come in the last mile. Like when people tune into these things, they just show up for the last mile. Is that the exciting part of it? I mean, I don't expect you to run along it, and there's no drone footage from ahead. So I guess it's kind of hard to follow.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of, and in 1980 too, you're not going to have the drones. You're not going to have that. So it's kind of just like you get volunteer camera crews along the way that they mark this point, they mark this point, they mark this point.
And she's so publicized because
Exactly.
she has this what was it, brain cancer?
That's what I was just about to say.
No.
So
no.
She made up the story of her dying with brain cancer because she missed the deadline to apply for the New York Marathon. And she was like, oh, I want to be able to run this marathon.
Except not
run the marathon. I'd rather take the subway. So she didn't have brain cancer, the brain injury. And she didn't have a leg injury. She just took the subway. And then she did the same thing pretty much in Boston. She just never ran it, and she hopped out of a busy crowded area. 2 years later, so for the 2 years after, she basically makes a big to-do out of it, and she says like, "Oh, I want to do it again. I still have the medal, but I'm not going to show you because I don't want someone to take it off me in public. So I'm just going to run the marathon again, and I'm going to prove everyone wrong." But before the marathon, the day of, she's arrested for laundering $60,000 from her real estate agent company that she works for, because all of her coworkers were like, oh, weird, she's living such a lavish lifestyle. So she was stealing from her company to go on top of the lying about winning marathons and having a traumatic brain injury.
There's layers to this.
Yeah. So apparently to her dying day, she denied not running the marathon.
Well, it sounds like she's a career scam artist.
Exactly. And that's kind of like...
and that's something that she did complete. So...
yeah, she was good at that.
I mean, like, think about, like, you'd have to time that marathon so well to jump out at the last mile.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of thought would have to go into that, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. If you jump out when you're in first, like... How is no one going to notice
How is no one
You'd have to
noticing
jump out
this?
at the perfect moment.
Yeah, and you're so publicized. I mean, like, in the first part where you shouldn't ever lie about having brain cancer.
Yeah, for sure.
Bureaucracy sucks. And you know what? If you're a little late for the application deadline,
run it next year.
Well, A, she should have ran it next year.
Yeah.
But B, they should have just let her without this ridiculous excuse. She wants to run, let her run.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, she was born in the 1950s, so at the time of like the 1979 marathon, she was 23.
Although these marathons are bigger, right? Like, these marathons have like a cutoff, like, qualifier for it. Right?
Yeah, so the New York qualifier like gets you to the Boston one, and that's why she needed to do the New York marathon to get to the Boston one. So I don't know if the Boston marathon was kind of like her end goal, and that's why she lied about the New York one,
right?
So she could eventually win the Boston.
And just to be clear, she did not run the New York one.
No,
qualifier.
There's many witnesses, including the lady who helped her from the subway to the end goal, that saw her on the subway for almost the entirety of the New York Marathon.
But we're just gonna let that go and let her run a whole nother marathon
Yeah.
before we start to crack down on this. And then she's a scam artist in her job too.
Yeah. So really the kind of
This
the
is
takeaway
nuts.
from this is like sports are crazy, and I guess you can't trust everyone going into it. I don't know. I honestly just didn't believe this story. That's
It does kind of make you think, like, if she was able to get away with this for
yeah.
well, a whole year, right? Because I assume you ran the New York one, and then next year you ran Boston.
Yeah, it's like 6 months later, which is kind of
Okay.
like that was where the questioning started, was that the New York Marathon was like 6 months before the Boston Marathon.
Right.
And she had like a 25-minute improvement
Mm,
on her time, which is like crazy,
absolutely,
especially
yeah.
when you don't even know what interval training is.
Yeah, you're lucky to shave a couple minutes off that.
Yeah.
Even in a couple seconds. Like,
Yeah.
and that is baffling.
Yeah.
Like, it actually makes you kind of question throughout history, like all these other great sport feats that weren't filmed.
Mhm.
You know, not bringing up Jesse Owens or my water polo match, but like other things that like they just didn't have the technology to really review carefully.
Yeah, exactly.